How do rural caregivers navigate caregiving challenges with limited resources and support? For many caregivers in these settings, the isolation can be overwhelming. Today, we're talking about the unique challenges faced by rural dementia caregivers, individuals who often carry the weight of caregiving with little outside help. Research is beginning to shine a light on their needs, and new solutions are emerging that offer hope and much needed support. Our guests today, Matthew Zuraw and Pam Brandon, each bring a deeply personal and professional perspective to this topic. Matthew's journey began after losing his grandmother to dementia and more recently his father to Alzheimer's. He has since become a fierce advocate for those impacted by the disease and co-founded CareVirtue, an innovative platform designed to support caregivers. Pam, with over 25 years of experience in caregiver education, is the founder of AGE-u-cate Training Institute. She's been a driving force behind programs like Dementia Live and Compassionate Touch, which are transforming how we care for those living with dementia. Today, we explore the distinct barriers faced by caregivers in rural communities and how Matthew and Pam are working to bridge those gaps. We'll discuss the emotional toll on these caregivers, the resources they desperately need, and the emerging solutions that are finally beginning to make a difference. So whether you're a caregiver yourself or simply want to understand how we can better support caregivers, this conversation is for you. Here is my interview with Matthew and Pam. Hi, Matthew and Pam, two wonderful people that we get to bring us all together. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation and hearing all of your insight. And I know we have our unique perspectives, so I think that's what's going to make this conversation so rich. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us, Nicole.
Great to be here.
And I would love for us to hear how you started on this road of your work and most importantly, focusing on supporting people living with dementia caregivers. And I know in our conversations, we're also going to dive into those caregivers that needed to be supported in those rural areas. So I'll have you start us off, Matthew.
Happy to. So for me, the experience of understanding what people living with dementia and their experiences are, and also caregivers, is very personal. I lost my grandmother to dementia about 20 years ago, and my father just passed away from Alzheimer's a couple months ago. So I've seen very firsthand how challenging the diseases can be, and how challenging it can be for families trying to support folks living with dementia. So my professional career was really focused in the corporate world. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a type of dementia, 7 years ago. And shortly after he was diagnosed, I decided that I wanted to do something else. And I was very fortunate to start volunteering and working with organizations that were focused on understanding dementia and doing research and helping to support caregivers. And then I've started some companies that are focused on doing the same thing since then. So I've been very fortunate to be able to spend my day-to-day life focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
I had a great conversation with my mom yesterday, and she described my experience that my father's Alzheimer's kind of defined who I was. So I'm kind of in a transition now with his passing, but I'm very thankful to continue to try to help others that are going through similar things that I've gone through and that I continue to go through with my family.
Thank you. I know. And your compassion, I know when we've had conversation and it does drive your work and how you pour into those relationships. So I know we are all better for it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Pam.
Yeah, much like Matthew, my work in this space and like so many others was born out of personal experience. Over 30 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and went down or through that journey, supporting my mom and him with that. He passed away after about 6 years from diagnosis. And of course that was life-changing in itself. And then very shortly after he passed away, my mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And they lived in Chicago. I was here in Dallas, Fort Worth with my young family, young children. And my mother moved here so that she could be closer to us. And I became her primary caregiver, my sister and I, who are here. We went on that journey together for over 9 years until she passed away. And it really did change my life. My career before that was much in the corporate world, although I did have some experience in starting a children's museum, believe it or not, during that time, which was experiential, and that led me to my work, what I'm doing now. But back to my journey was really, and my passion was, this has changed my life. I need to help others. And I was really fortunate in 2008 to have the opportunity to work with an incredible lady here in Dallas, Fort Worth, who was working on a contractual basis with the area agencies on aging. And there are 3 major AAAs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we developed and delivered caregiver education programs, which was it was all encompassing. It was education sessions, it was leading support groups, it was holding conferences. We were on the road in over 20 counties in North Texas, much of them rural counties. That experience put me in touch with thousands of caregivers. And, there's nothing like leading a support group, and many, many support groups that will give you an insight into the challenges and the needs of caregivers. So it was an amazing experience that led me to creating AGE-u-cate and the programs that AGE-u-cate offers now today. So yeah, I feel like I'm living my passion every day, and we just see more and more of those challenges. I always tell people, 30 years ago, I was so lost as a caregiver and family member. And yes, there are more resources out there now, but there's so many more of us. And so people they still need as much information and education and support and resources today as they did 30 years ago.
They do. I have found that people I meet that are moving missions forward have that personal story of care. And I think that's what makes it so meaningful, because we're driven by this deep desire to want to change, bring awareness, our own
Right.
experiences of needing help and support in ways that we didn't have at the time. And so I appreciate the ongoing conversation. And I do feel that there is this momentum happening, right? As now we've got different ways to share and support and empower people that really need it. So I'm really thankful for that. Yeah, thankful for the work
Absolutely.
you both do.
One comment I would make to Pam's point about resources, and we'll chat more about this as we get deeper into the conversation, but there's been a lot of focus nationally on dementia. It is a growing challenge within the United States. Currently, there's between 6 and 7 million folks living with dementia, and that is expected to more than double over the next couple of decades. And as that number has increased, the federal government has taken a lot of actions to focus on caregivers and also invest in therapeutics and supports for caregivers. As Pam mentioned, the area agencies on aging, which we'll call AAAs in the conversation, they are a great resource that has received more funding to help support caregivers. And so the difference, at least for me, when my grandmother was living with dementia over 20 years ago, and when my father was living with Alzheimer's over the past decade, there are more resources and there is more work being done because it's such a challenge, and unfortunately it is more common now. And a lot of folks like Pam and I have been personally affected and have decided to spend our time and energy to try and help the experiences of those that are currently facing it and unfortunately will face it in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my, it's so true. I remember doing an interview with Dr. Jason Karlowish, and he had talked about obviously the history and where we are, but what's so unfortunate is with Alzheimer's and dementia, historically, right, it's not perceived as a good business model for a disease. And unfortunately, what that has created is historically more lack of funding resource. And so having voices like yourself and like Dr. Karlowish really addressing how do we look for that funding? How do we champion that? How do we provide that so that it can be in the hands of the people that really need it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off track here, Nicole, but there are continue to be new programs that are coming out. There's a new model called the GUIDE model, which was awarded to 200 groups throughout the country that has a very specific focus on not only helping the person with dementia, but extending that focus to the caregivers. And we can all be thankful that our tax dollars are being put to use for programs like this that are cutting edge and really trying to solve the problems. But to Jason's point, it's not a lucrative business, and that makes it really tough for organizations to spend time and energy. But it's the good hearts of people who donate and also the good minds of folks who are making decisions at state and federal levels that is helping to start peel back some of these challenges.
Yeah. And with the GUIDE model, it's unique in that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the first program that's specifically focused and supports the caregiver. Is that correct? Yeah.
That is correct.
Really, really, we're moving in the right direction with that.
Yeah, I've talked to some of the GUIDE model participants, and as with any programs, there's going to be growth, there's going to be changes with this. They're trying to figure out how it's all going to work as well, along with the government, but it's a first huge step, I think, in really putting those support tools in the hands of the caregivers. I mean, let's be fair. We can't improve the quality of life of those living with dementia in our communities unless we are supporting caregivers.
Yeah.
We have to address the caregiver issue and make people aware that yes, we have 5, 6, 7 million people who have been diagnosed with dementia. That number is probably double when you look at those who have not been diagnosed with dementia but are living with it. But we really need to push behind those caregivers, our families.
Yeah. And in that same conversation, Dr. Karlowish with Penn Memory Center, he looks at his treatment as there are two people that he is treating. He is treating the person living with dementia and the family at the same time. He doesn't separate that. And I think that is so important. As you were saying, it really is the combination and the ability to support everyone involved in the process. It's a whole family. It's a whole family disease.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know that we are going to talk about, the emerging support. With that, I think it's important for us to identify what are some of those significant barriers and challenges today, specifically talking about rural dementia caregivers, right? What they face on a daily basis. I know that is probably universal for other caregivers as well. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start and share some of my thoughts. So just as a little bit of background and to help ground ourselves in some of the challenges that they're facing and the barriers, 1 out of 5 Americans live in a rural area,
Mm.
and rural family members are more likely to be caregivers than family members who live in urban areas. And the rural population is aging faster. And so age is not necessarily it doesn't drive dementia, but there's a strong relationship between age and dementia. And so as the population ages faster, there's going to be more incidence of dementia relative to where it is today. And there will be more caregivers living in rural areas in the future as well. To the comments about it's kind of a family and the whole network and the way Jason approaches it with two folks, the average person living with dementia has I use the term care network of about 8 people who are helping to support their living with dementia, including obviously a primary caregiver and secondary caregivers and folks that are in the community. And so that's a pretty big group of folks that are trying to take care of one person. I mean, the adage that it takes a village when you think about trying to care for a child, it's very true for dementia as well. It really does take a village of support. And that's really one of the big barriers and challenges in rural areas is the uniqueness of their barriers and challenges. They have infrastructure barriers. So the type of resources that are available are different. They also have cultural barriers such as stigma and including mistrust of those outside of the community. And those cultural barriers impede beneficial activities that somebody may take part of in an urban area. These barriers can also be true in urban areas, but they are well defined and well researched for rural areas. And those really do impact the experiences that rural dementia caregivers have. Ultimately, they have more burden in their caregiving roles and they're more isolated. I think an interesting way to think about it that most of us experienced was during COVID. We were pretty much hunkered down in our homes for at least a period of time. And the inability to access typical services and the inability to connect with people really changed our life experiences. And it's not exactly the same in rural areas, but there's a flavor of that that rural dementia caregivers experience more often. They don't have the same services. They can't walk out their door and see their neighbor necessarily as often. And so those are kind of lived experiences that a lot of us have been through that can help us kind of relate to some of the challenges and barriers that rural dementia caregivers face.
Yeah. And the toll, that isolation piece, right? That loneliness that might lean more towards that when we're in those environments, the impact, right, on our mental health. As caregivers, and our mental health is already such a process, right? It takes a toll in any environment, but specifically that could be that added level of challenge with that as well. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'll add to that just the statistics also on the shortage of geriatricians that we have in this country is alarming. I pulled up a recent statistic that said barely 1/10 of physicians practice in rural areas.
Wow.
1/10. That we have a shortage of 20,000 primary care physicians, 40,000 geriatricians. So if you look at that number of the shortage and then combine that with the fact that 1/10 are practicing in rural, we have a tremendous shortage of healthcare providers to support the rural population. Nursing assistants, there's a 17% gap in those. It's 20.9 per thousand adults in rural and 25 per thousand in urban areas. So the gap for basic healthcare is huge. I want to talk about or add to the conversation about the challenges often in rural areas for, say, home health, Meals on Wheels services, hospice care services. Hard to find people who will drive the distances in farming communities. It's getting harder to find those people who are willing to drive and willing to deliver those meals. And as we know, Meals on Wheels is often the only connection for those people. They see someone and they can have an engage in conversation, and same with the area agencies, just finding the people who will travel. Basic services, I think, Matthew, you said it, we take for granted in urban areas that if we can't get around, we can call Uber or Lyft, right? Is it so easy to do that in urban areas? Is it so easy to have grocery delivery done? So yeah, I think your example, Matthew, of our experiencing that during COVID is very much a taste of what we had for that extreme isolation. The other thing I want to add, just in my experience in working with in rural areas that I did many years ago, there's often a very tight-knit community. Often the faith communities play a very large role in that effort. I'm thinking of several communities where those faith communities were kind of that hub and spoke. They were the lead. They were the ones connecting with the services in the area, the community-based organizations. The church is changing. Those churches are aging, in many cases getting smaller. The resources are not always there for that church to be the center point of having the people to be able to help. Thinking of, how great it would be that every faith community was able to offer a support group or some type of respite care. Well, that just is not available today. When you've got rural churches that are getting smaller and aging, right, it's not as easy to put those in place. So that collaborative network in a rural area where it was strong, it is becoming very difficult because they are aging so quickly.
It is, yeah. And the dynamics with the church culture too, right? So I think it's shifting and people are finding community in different ways where that is really that church. I know my grandma is one of 13 kids and grew up in a rural town in Wisconsin, and the church community was everything. It was
Yes,
every social gathering, it was every support system and all of that. And with the age, and I think with maybe people choosing other things in life or whatnot, it shifted. And so what we knew as the support system in those environments is shifting. Yeah, such a
yeah,
unique point. Yeah. And, long distance caregiving is a part of our families in some ways where we have people that move to different parts of the country, and I can see how that adds another layer of complexity because now in our long distance caregiving, we are maybe able to set up a ride or deliver Instacart or have a service stop by to support us in that. And when you don't have access to those resources that we take for granted, it makes it very challenging. Yeah.
absolutely.
There's been some really interesting research coming out of Indiana University on telecaregiving,
Mm,
with the concept being, so for me and my family, most of my family lives in Virginia and I live in California. And so the things that I could do to support my mother are different than the things that my brother who lives in town with my mother can
mm,
do to support her.
yeah.
And so, like you're saying, I can do things like help with the finances or order groceries that can be delivered. I can't, go in and organize things for mom. I could hire somebody or organize helping her to do that. So there is a distinction based off of geography
Yeah.
that really does have an impact. And one of the changes that I've seen that, and again, just continue to use COVID as this catalyst that is hopefully going to be helpful it really, the experience with COVID really did introduce technology to more folks. I'm sure a lot of folks can resonate with more video conferences with family members, where maybe that wasn't something they had done previously, whether that's on Zoom or whether that's on FaceTime or some other application, and kind of getting that social connection that we were missing as we were hunkered down, again, thinking about that experience for rural dementia caregivers. And so this infiltration and use of technology over the last 5 years has kind of accelerated the ability for additional connection and for knowledge on how to use technology, which I think is going to really help continue to improve the experiences in rural relative to urban on a relative basis. I don't think that they'll be equal, but I think the growth in support can continue to go because of some of those experiences that have happened to a lot of us over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I definitely see that it's, as we broaden internet access and the boomer generation that is moving into those aging years, they are more tech savvy than the oldest generation now. So I do think we will see that change. I do think that helping mobilize families to be that network of support is going to be needed. But we can do that. We will be able to do that more with telehelp, getting the families together, having those conversations. How can we each do our part to help mom and dad or whomever it is to live at home safely and whatnot? So, yeah, I agree. There's, I think we're going to see a lot of advancements that tele everything will allow us to do.
Yeah, so true. You had mentioned that research study that was it out of Indiana, I think you had referenced. What else are you seeing or any eye-opening findings from research that is also out there?
Yeah, so CareVirtue is a technology company, and we are focused on helping to support organizations that support caregivers. So, for example, we've mentioned the area agencies on aging, the AAAs. We partner with organizations like that, as well as other organizations that provide respite, like adult daycare centers, to make that experience easier both for the professionals as well as the caregivers, and moving more towards a digital world. It's very surprising to me as we chat with organizations how much paper and how many phone calls are required. And those seem like very simple things, but it's really built out of necessity for small organizations that are getting started. And so we really help to try and focus some of our efforts on making life easier for both of those groups of professionals and caregivers. And as part of that, we have been very fortunate to have received funding from the National Institutes of Health to study some of the challenges faced by caregivers, and in particular also rural caregivers and the organizations that are serving them. And I think one of the most striking differences is that there's this term, it's called home and community-based service providers. It's kind of a mouthful. You may see it referenced as HCBS, home and community-based service providers, such as the local area agencies on aging. They really are a trusted source of support. So they're in the community. There's over 600 of these area agencies on aging throughout the country. But nearly 50% of rural adults are not exposed to the services that are offered through home and community-based services. And many of these services are actually free or they're incredibly low cost. For example, less than 3% of rural adults have any knowledge that there are any caregiving training services available. And so you think 3 out of 100, less than 3 out of 100 people know that there is training to help them in this role of caring for somebody. The research around that really, to me, indicates that we have to do a better job building trust in the community, and we have to do a better job educating and making sure that rural caregivers, as well as other caregivers, know about the resources that are available, number one, in their community, and number two, at large, as we were mentioning, that can be accessed regardless of where you are through a virtual support group that's tailored to, for example, males, because males are only 1/3 of caregivers and it's less common. I am in a support group where I am the only male. And I'm fine with that. But some folks want to talk to, how do you have those services available to fit what you're looking for? They are much more scalable and available on a national level, or maybe outside of your community. So that technology is a really important thing for folks to know about services beyond just what's available in their community.
Yeah, the lack of knowledge, like you said, and we are not able to find the support we need if we don't even know it's available, you know?
Absolutely.
So I guess the question is, how can we do better, right? Like, how can we share? Are you finding some innovations or solutions that are working, that are bringing more access or information, knowledge in ways that, yeah. And how can I help? I mean, I'm like, ready,
Yeah.
let's go.
So Pam, if I can tee you up, I'd love to be able to do that. But Pam and I have known each other for a couple years now. And again, our personal experiences kind of drew us together. And I've shared that we are kindred spirits. And one of the things that I really love about what Pam is doing is some of what AGE-u-cate offers is an experience of understanding what it's like to live with dementia. The program is called Dementia Live. And as she mentioned, some of the work that she's done in getting out into rural communities, that experience really does help to break through some of these barriers that I was talking about earlier by starting to establish trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly critical. So with that, Pam, I'd love if you would be able to share more about your program and kind of what that's doing specifically in rural areas. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for that intro, Matt. Um, it is really a challenge, rural and urban, anywhere, to find caregivers. If we could find them, we can help them, right? That saying, you don't know what you don't know, that is really true with caregivers. They are oftentimes, and I knew this with my work in leading support groups, that when people came to a support group, most of the time, they had already reached some level of caregiver burnout. Now, that is a dangerous place to be, right? When you have reached that level of stress, we really need some intervention to help that person, because when you're at that level of stress, you are not able to provide quality care to your loved one. You're not caring for yourself. Unfortunately, that can lead to potential elder abuse. I mean, there's a lot of risks when you get to that. So early intervention is extremely important. Finding caregivers and building trust. In rural communities, they are tight-knit. I think Matthew mentioned this in the beginning. Breaking that stigma and building that trust is really important. I mean, look at, if you go back to the numbers, they don't have many healthcare providers. So they're not getting quality time with their doctors. They're not able to build that trust then. So that brings me to, how can we quickly build that trust? So the Dementia Live program does that. It's an experience of living with dementia that then that trained coach is able to, in a very impactful way, build trust with that caregiver, form a relationship, and then get them to a place where they are able to provide resources, local resources, telehealth resources, whatever that is. Get them to education, get direct them to support groups. That piece is what we focus on, is that early connections, so that all these other tools that we have in place to along the caregiver continuum can be able to be plugged in, right? But it's that trust building that is everything. I mean, relationships, you can't replace relationships, right? That's what it's all about. And that is what caregivers need the most. And they need to feel like they do have somebody to talk to. It's becoming more knowledgeable about the incredible work of AAAs and the ADRCs. But when I was doing my work years ago, no one knew what an area agency on aging was. And when I would talk about it and let them know what great services we have in North Central Texas, did you know that you could get respite care for no charge? Did you know that, and I would list the services and their eyes would light up, and no, we had never heard of it. Well, here's a phone number and you will get a person to talk to. So another means of dissemination of really critical and important and impactful community resources can sometimes only be achieved through a trusting relationship.
We need to almost like immobilize, almost like a Peace Corps group to go
Absolutely.
right, build
Yep.
relationship, be present in the community, right?
Be
Do
present.
side by side, I also, when I was studying for my degree, this was like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 20 years ago. um, I was studying gerontology and it was kind of that same idea. And no one knew what I was talking about. It was like, what
Yeah.
is that? I don't even know what you're going to school for.
Right.
So we have come a long way, but there is, yeah, the ability. And I was just sharing about the area agencies on aging with a friend of mine yesterday who was wanting to find transportation for her mom, who lives outside of the cities. And so that having an awareness, I was able to share that with her. But I know that the more we do that, the more that'll come together and yeah, build that trust.
Yeah, the other initiative that is really growing is dementia-friendly initiatives. And there are, I think, 400 or more now that are popping up, and many in rural areas. I am very involved with the Dementia Friendly Fort Worth initiative. Through our work with AGE-u-cate, I am often talking to dementia-friendly initiatives all over the country. And we have a huge opportunity to build collaborations with these groups. And I just say that all the time because I feel so strongly that if we're not working with each other and we continue to work in silos, we will not achieve what we can by working together. And that is public-private partnerships, that's community-based organizations, understanding, how they can gain trust from their local governments and whatnot. Like everybody has to be knowledgeable about this in order to break through the stigmas and build awareness and be able to move forward. It's this circle of trust among these collaborators that we need to see. And I've seen us do this successfully in Fort Worth, where the universities and the home care and senior living and dementia friendly and area agencies are all working together to build a network that truly is what it takes to build an age friendly, dementia friendly community.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the collective. It takes
Mm-hmm.
all of us. We say that even in the other people that are in the podcast world are care influencers, right, on
Yeah.
social media. And what I've loved to see is that we all support each other and share each other's work because we have to do this together, right? To be able to build more of an impact, more of, more of an audience. And the audience is purely so that we can touch more lives, So if we can do that together, I believe that that's what that is about. Pam, what are some of the other programs and the ways that you're making a difference with AGE-u-cate for those rural caregivers?
So the Compassionate Touch program was a program that was born many, many years ago from a lady called Ann Catlin, and she was an occupational therapist, massage therapist, and she was working on these incredibly impactful research-based skilled techniques to calm and comfort and engage with people very quickly that that I became aware of many years ago. And at the time, she was only teaching them to this incredible program to massage therapists. And I called her and I said, "Hold on." I think these techniques can be used and should be used by anyone. And she said, "You're right, they can." And I said, "Well, can we expand this and put it literally in the hands of anybody?" And so our relationship developed, and we then acquired the program, and now it is simple techniques that do exactly what I said. They calm, they comfort, they lower blood pressure, they help us sleep. They are incredibly impactful for hospice, for professional caregivers, for families, for people living with dementia or others.
Mhm.
It's often used with children, who are, maybe have autism or just I've calmed it with my grandchildren. So used it to calm my grandchildren. So that's one program. And then our other program that we developed is called Flashback, which is a reminiscence program that is used in memory cafes and senior living. It's just a fun way to bring back memories to people and tapping into that long ago memory that they still have. All these programs kind of build on each other. And then we have a relationship with Opening Minds Through Art. And that is an incredible art engagement program. So we're really building on that strong foundational empathy building, understanding of dementia, and then we have the other programs to support that.
That's wonderful. It's so wonderful. And for us listening that are like, okay, I'm in my community, how can I come together to provide support for caregivers and for caregivers that are maybe living in those environments practically? What steps can we take? I love that practicality of like, okay, where should we start? What should we look for?
I'll go back to what you were saying earlier, Nicole, that this community and kind of networking is so important. And some of the research that we've done at CareVirtue really found that simply educating people about the resources that are available helped folks feel a sense of hope.
Mm,
It helped folks feel less alone.
mm,
And it helped folks feel less burdened. And I
mm,
know that sounds incredibly simple. And what we did is we tried to understand what the needs were of the rural dementia caregivers that we were supporting and shared with them that, either these national resources or community resources in their area that were available. And as an outcome of that, 100% of the folks that participated in this research with us knew about resources that were helpful, and they felt like they had quick access to resources, which was very empowering. And so I would suggest for those who are listening, if they're thinking about ways, is share some of the things that have been helpful to you.
mm,
And then also, it is well researched that caregivers are reluctant to ask for help. So if you are one of those folks who is reluctant to ask for help, I just strongly recommend it. It can be so difficult. There is help that is available. And if you're a person who has help to offer, provide it. Your personal experiences in what you've gone through can be so empowering and insightful. And there are a lot of volunteer opportunities. Typically, area agencies on aging are nonprofit organizations. So they are looking for folks to volunteer to help support some of the services that they're providing, including things like volunteer drivers, like you were mentioning earlier. Someone's trying to find transportation, which is common in rural areas. And secondly, Pam mentioned Dementia Friendly America. They have a program called Dementia Friends.
Dementia Friends.
So you can be trained to help those in your community or in rural communities better understand what dementia is, so that if somebody living with dementia goes to a restaurant and asks for coffee 5 times in the matter of 3 minutes, like my father used to do, the waitress is going to be kind and understanding that, my dad isn't trying to be a pain in the butt. He just doesn't remember that he's asked for coffee 4 other times in the last couple of minutes. So he just wants his coffee, and that's on his mind, and that's his experience. So helping waitresses or folks in the community understand that is a great opportunity through Dementia Friendly America. And their website is DF for dementiafriendlyamerica.org. Going there and seeing ways you can get involved, I think, is another great opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add to that too, that I look back on the work I did many years ago, and just really having the goal when I spoke to caregivers of helping them to understand that the caregiving journey can be a beautiful journey and filled with so many blessings. That doesn't mean it's easy. It was the hardest journey I ever did in my life. It changed my life. That said, I wouldn't change it for the world. What it taught me about love and acceptance and all the values in life is just, again, I wouldn't be here talking to you had I not been moved so much, and the relationship, just the closeness that I had with my mother during that time, especially, when she was living here. We were definitely on that journey together, and it was in so many ways just a beautiful thing. I think caregivers need to know that they can gain that out of their caregiving journey, but again, empowering them with the basic tools and skills will allow them the room to take it to deal with the emotional roller coaster that often comes with it, the ups and downs and the valleys and the highs, and to sit down and experience the moment with your loved one, because that is something that you take, that's the golden nugget out of it, right? That's what you should be able to stop and say, oh, this was just, look at that memory that I just created. Look at what I just was able to share with my children that they saw, with their grandmother, just thinking about my own kids and some of the experiences with them watching her, with the Parkinson's. So I think there's a part of me that's just so passionate to help caregivers understand that this can be a good journey.
Yeah.
Not easy, but not easy. And that's where all of us want to help you. We want to help you through that tough part so that you can take the golden nuggets and make it something beautiful.
Yeah.
I'll make one quick plug too for Pam. So I went through Dementia Live. And so if somebody wants to get involved and understand how to help, if you've not been through that program, it doesn't take long, but if it's available in your community, you should do it. And number 2, if it's not available in your community, talk to an organization about reaching out to Pam about getting it in your community. That experience with Dementia Live provides really helpful insight to what a person with dementia may experience
Mhm.
and some of the challenges in their day-to-day lives that I think gives perspective. If you're trying to care for somebody, your compassion level and understanding of what that experience might be like will change, and your insight into that will change. So again, as a plug for the good work that Pam's doing, if you haven't experienced Dementia Live, find out if it's available in your community. And you can go to Pam's website, AGE-u-cate, and look a little bit more about it. And then secondarily, if you have an organization in your community, like your area agency on aging, that's not offering it, ask them
Yeah.
if they could offer it for the folks in your community so that you and others can experience that as well.
Right, right. I love that you say that. I always say, we have agency as families to ask for what we need and for what we want. And if it is not offered, we need to fight for that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, for that. And what an honor it is to meet you, Nicole. I will say that that in this space, there's so many people in the aging space, and it's not hard to see those that are leading organizations that have passion and heart and really are doing the right things for the right reasons. And I'm honored because Matthew is absolutely one of the stars on that. Everything he is doing with the platforms that he's creating is starting from his heart. And the work you do, Nicole, that's really what it's all about.
I'm so glad that we all found each other and we can help and share and support and
Exactly.
yeah, use our
Yeah.
voice together. So I've enjoyed this conversation and I've learned I want people to be able to find you and connect with the work that you're doing. So as we close out our time, any final words and also just share about where we can find you to connect with you.
Yeah, first, thank you, Nicole. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and share some of my experiences and some of what I've learned in
Mm.
my journey. And for me, this is cathartic. And as Pam kindly mentioned, this is an incredible passion of mine and part of my father's and grandmother's legacy that is important for me to carry on to make a difference in the lives of others. My final thought would be is that there is probably more support than most folks realize,
Mhm.
and reaching out to find out where that support is. I would start with the area agencies on aging. Again, I know we've mentioned that a lot, but I
Mhm.
think that this support can get to you, and there's a lot more than folks have in their mind. And then secondly, I would say it is a tough journey. And one of the really helpful pieces of advice that I got as I was earlier in this journey when my father was living with Alzheimer's was really trying to appreciate what was there and what I could do. And that really forces folks, and me in particular, to live in the moment. And somebody living with dementia really does live in the moment. And Pam used the word beautiful. It's quite a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
I recall probably about a year before my father passed away, probably about this time last year, I went on one of our last walks together, and I asked him, I just said, help me understand what it's like living with Alzheimer's. And I reminded him that he did have Alzheimer's, and he said, it's really not that much different. Things are about the same, which is not true. Um, and it just really opened up my eyes to, one, how important my mom's role was in taking care of him. And secondarily, that living in the moment for my father was the way that he was living life. And that can be so challenging for all of us. You mentioned at the beginning earlier, Nicole, like the distractions that come with grief and caregiving. As much as we can to be in that moment is it's a really beautiful thing if we can do that, and dementia can help teach us that if we look at what's there. And so I'd give folks that hope and encouragement with all the challenges that are going on. Try as much as you can to appreciate the small moments and the small things. And if anybody ever wants to reach out to me, they can visit our website at carevirtue.com. You can look me up on any social media or connect with me. My email address is matthew@carevirtue.com. So I'd be happy to chat with anybody and share more about my experiences as well.
Thank you, Matthew.
Wow, that was very inspiring, Matthew. And I'll just follow up and say this has been a great conversation, and brought back so many thoughts about, all the connections I've had along the way. I would encourage people to think about, if you've been through this journey and learned, as we all do, pass it on to others. I think about all the people who reached out along my journey, the friends and family and strangers, and and I think about that often, that I try to do that to my neighbors, my elderly neighbors and friends who are now at the point of being in the caregiving role that I was many years ago, and caring for their parents, for their spouses. I want to be there for them. That's part of the joy. That's part of what it's about, what life is about, to pass on the blessings that you've received. So, and then I'll just follow up that I too can be reached. I am really passionate about dementia-friendly initiatives, and running a support group. I had a lot of experience with that. If anybody out there needs any, to talk to anybody, I'm more than happy to share. I love to engage in conversation on anything in this space. So don't hesitate. I'm at pam@age-u-cate.com. Also on LinkedIn and all those other platforms. And I will say that if anybody does want to go through Dementia Live, you can go to our website, certainly reach out to us, AGE-u-cate.com. We also have a list of all of our program partners around the US and Australia and New Zealand and Canada who have our programs, and you can find out who is a program partner and who offers Dementia Live. But certainly reach out to us personally. We will get back with you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Matt.
I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I did
Bye.
too.
Are you looking for another encouraging podcast? Let me introduce you to my friend Elizabeth Miller, the host of the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast. She visits with family caregivers and dives into their caregiving and self-care strategies. She also highlights that family caregivers are the experts in caregiving. Beyond the informative conversation, Elizabeth reveals the tried and true resources and practical self-care tips that empower caregivers to prioritize their health and happiness. You can find the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast wherever you download your favorite podcast, or go to her website, www.happyhealthycaregiver.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.